Right.
Good afternoon, my lord.
Now, good afternoon, Mr. Gale. Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed. Yes, my lord, the next witness is Paul Deakins. His statement...
Good afternoon, Mr. Gale.
Is your lordship hearing me?
Yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Gale.
Obviously not.
No.
We're having a... if you can't hear me, there's not much problem telling you we are having a problem.
Can you hear me now, Mr. Gale?
I can hear you, my lord, yes. I don't know whether you can hear me.
I can now, I'm
Yes.
glad to see. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I understand we have two witnesses this afternoon.
Two witnesses.
Mr. Deakins and Miss Hunter.
That's correct. Mr. Deakins is present with us in the room now.
Good afternoon, Mr. Deakins.
Good afternoon.
His statement is reference SCIWT 0413, then 501. And before Mr. Deakins does give evidence, and I think this is something that has been raised with him when we met last week. Mr. Deakins, there is in place something called a general restriction order which prevents naming of various people. In your case, there hasn't been an application to disapply that, so that I must ask you, please be mindful that you should not name any person, and that includes your father.
Yeah.
So you can refer to him obviously as your father, your dad, however you refer to him as, but please don't give his name.
No.
And similarly, any of those people who may have been treating your father, please don't give their names, but you can give the names of the various institutions, health institutions that your father was in. So they are Wishaw General Hospital, Canderhaven House Care Home, and Hare Myers Hospital. So you can name the hospitals. So if something slips out, don't worry.
Okay.
We'll deal with it, but if I can ask you, just not. Anyway, with that introduction, Mr. Deakins, your full name is Paul Deakins, and your details are known to the inquiry, and you've provided us with a detailed statement, really concerning the circumstances of the eventual death of your father. And you are content that that statement, together with the evidence that you're going to give today, constitutes the evidence that you're providing for the inquiry.
Yes.
And you are agreeable that that information may be used by the inquiry, it may be recorded and published.
Yes.
Thank you. First, a little about you, Mr. Deakins. You tell us in your statement that you have a background in nursing between 1988 and 2003.
Yes.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit about that background, please?
Well, I started nursing back in 1988 and working primarily in the private sector in a nursing home and various nursing outlets. I did that for a couple of years, then I was offered a job in specific mental health, which was older adults with varying degrees of dementia, Alzheimer's and alcohol-related and other mental illnesses. I started that job in 1990 until I left in 2003. I started as an assistant manager and I worked my way up to a deputy manager, residential establishment. And we also had a weekend daycare facility for people who had mental health problems living in the local community. That was non-residential part. They used to come in the morning, provide service levels for adults over the weekend. And then my normal job was obviously 24-hour residential care on a shift system.
Now, you tell us that, and you've summarised it in what you just said, and you were a manager in mental health
Yes.
provision for 14 years. So what I take it through saying you were a manager, you had an overseeing role.
Yes. There was a management team of senior care staff, an assistant manager. I was a deputy manager, and then I had a unit manager.
And how many patients, if that's the correct term for the people you were looking after, how many patients would you be looking after?
On the residential scale, we had eight adults, and at weekends we had accommodation for up to 18.
Right. Okay. And would these be people with a variety of mental health issues?
Yes, mostly dementia, some alcohol-related dementia, a lot of older retired people, Alzheimer's and dementia, but some younger people as well, below retirement age, who may be affected with alcohol-related mental illness, deemed to be dementia.
And in the various comments that you make later in your evidence, do you bring that experience to some of the observations that you make and would ask the inquiry to have regard to?
Yes.
Okay. Now, as I say, we're here to hear from you about your father, and we know from your statement that he died of COVID pneumonia in Wishaw General Hospital on the 11th of November 2020.
Yes.
And he was 82.
82 years old.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about him and your relationship with him?
Yes. We lived quite close to each other. I stayed just half a mile up from where my dad stayed. My dad stayed just in a small one-bedroom pensioners flat. Probably about more than 10 years ago, he began to lose his sight. He can't remember the word now. He took sight deterioration,
Yes.
macular degeneration.
Macular degeneration.
Sorry.
No, don't worry.
And his sight, he lived alone in that house. To begin with, a permanent, independently he lived alone. But as his sight deteriorated, his physical health deteriorated as well. He had, in previous years, had a heart bypass, so he had cardiological problems, had COPD, and then latterly the diabetes as well. But prior to my dad dying, he completely lost his sight. He was down to about 1% vision. So throughout the years, as my dad got worse, for the want of a better word, my care input with my dad increased.
Yeah.
I would look after him more, do things for him more.
Okay. You talk principally in your statement about what the events in October, November 2020.
Yes.
But your father, as you say, lived on his own, and I think he had a level of assistance both from yourself and from, did he have carers as well?
He had carers sporadically. He had carers one year, I think it was in 2018. He'd taken on well with heart problems, and when he was discharged from hospital, he had home carers via the local council. I can't be specific as to say how long it lasted, but they would come in at night and they would heat up a meal for him, which I would probably have made earlier on that day. They would heat a meal for him and sit with him for maybe half an hour and chat to him, make sure he was okay and things like that. I had him on a dosette system for his medication. They would help him to take his medication. I'm struggling to remember how long he had that for. But latterly, before he went into, I'm sorry, I'm getting mixed up. Before he went into hospital, before COVID came, he had carers from the previous Christmas. He'd get out of hospital on the Christmas, after having been unwell. He had carers for a few weeks into January, and all of a sudden I got a phone call to say that it was stopping, so he had no one, no carers at all, and that was in January. And then COVID came in the March. I've lost my way a bit.
No,
Sorry.
it's okay. Please don't worry, Mr. Deakins. I'll try and help you through
Okay.
various important points. The events which eventually led to your father's death in hospital began, I think, on the 23rd of October 2020, when there was a fire in his home, is that right? And I think it was due to smoke inhalation.
That's correct.
That he was admitted to Hare Myers Hospital.
Yes.
And you tell us about that in paragraphs 5 through to 8 of your statement.
Okay.
You don't need to look at it, but just for the reference. Given his condition prior to being admitted to hospital, did you have any concerns about him being admitted to hospital?
Due to COVID, yes, I always thought he would be susceptible, more susceptible to COVID. Due to he had COPD, he had breathing difficulties. His mobility wasn't good, and his sight wasn't good.
Yeah. And I think you were given certain information after his, or at around the time of his admission to hospital, about your father being moved within the hospital due to the cleaning of the curtains in the ward in which he was a patient. And I think at paragraph 8, you express a view, and don't worry about the language. Please just tell us what you said about the suggestion that there was some cleaning of curtains taking place.
When my dad went into hospital on the Friday night, he wasn't admitted to a ward until late on at night. He was still in the A&E department. So obviously as the night went on, we'd left until the next morning. When he phoned me and he told me he was in a ward, it was, I would assume, well, he described it as being a 6-bedded bay, 6 beds in the bay. That was in the morning about 9:30, 10 o'clock. Chatting to him throughout the day, on and off and on and off. I'd spoken to him later on in the morning or early, maybe lunchtime, and I'd says, "Are you okay?" And he said, "I'll have to phone you back, I'm getting moved." And I says, "Why moved?" And he says, "Oh, they're moving us into the big room, they're taking down the curtains, they need to do some spring cleaning. And I said, "Excuse me," I said, "Spring cleaning my arse? I've got COVID in the ward." And my dad knew, he was very aware of what COVID was. He was aware of the circumstances in which people were catching it. And he was in the main room, and he wasn't told, I never knew anything about it that whole day. I'm assuming they stayed that whole day. They maybe get put back into the ward at night. But to me, the patients had been emptied out the room for a deep clean.
Right. And is that obviously something you hadn't been told per se, but was that an inference that you took based on your previous experience as a manager in a unit?
I was keeping in contact with my dad on the phone, so I was asking him constantly what was happening, and it was that was a Saturday. And the Saturday evening I phoned the ward, and it rang and rang and rang and rang out, and I never got an answer from anyone. And then as the night went on, and as I spoke to my dad as time was going on, he said, "I think we're getting put back in to the ward now." And I'm thinking, well, they've shipped all the patients out. Given there was a bed crisis all over every hospital, there wasn't much room for manoeuvre. So I imagine they only moved them from A to bring them back to B again. And they get put back into his ward late on in the Saturday night. I remember speaking to him, it was after 11 o'clock at night, and they had only just been moved back into the one. I said, "What have you done all day?" And he says, "Well, I had to lie in the bed for a while or sit in the chair." But I think, and again, you weren't access to the hospital, it wasn't a ward that he was moved into, and there was a patient holding area that I later became aware of.
Okay. Just on, you were obviously able to keep in touch with your father by phone. were you in touch with any of those who were caring for your father?
No.
Were you able to ascertain from any of the staff what the prevalence or otherwise of COVID within the hospital generally, and in your father's ward in particular, was?
Nope, there was no one to answer the question. I'd asked what happened was on the Saturday morning. I had asked my dad if I could, I said to my dad I was going to phone the hospital to see if I could take some stuff up for him, because the day before when he got taken out, the house, everything was so quick, we didn't pack a bag or anything for him. The fire brigade wouldn't let us in the house, because the house was bad with smoke, so we couldn't start. He said, you need to go with what you've got. In fact, the neighbour next door gave him slippers, one gave him a jacket, and another one gave him a dressing gown, because he had nothing bar the clothes he was wearing. He was covered black head to toe in smoke.
Right.
So I phoned the ward the next day and I says, I know there's no visiting, my dad needs stuff, would it be okay to come? And she says, yes, by all means come, but you'll not be able to. I said, I know fine well I'm not allowed, but I just want to make sure my dad's got stuff. And she says, yes. So I said, any particular time? She says, no, just come and someone will see you. And I drove to the hospital the next day. I went in and the chap, the window, someone saw me, came over, a nurse, and I said, I'm handing this in for my father, said his name. And I said, is he all right? And she wasn't prepared to discuss anything with me. And I says to her, he's having a business with COVID. And she said, I'll have to go. And she just abruptly cut me off and took the bag away from me. I went outside and I phoned my dad and I said to my dad, I've given the bag, but I don't know when you'll get it, and I don't think he got the bag until the next day. It's toiletries and things that you would need when you go to the hospital, obviously.
Yeah. So at that point, which is just after your father's admission to hospital, you weren't made aware or weren't aware of the prevalence or otherwise of COVID within
Not officially, no, I wasn't told by any manner of means.
Okay. Can I take you forward a little? You were contacted by your father's social worker, I think on the 27th of October. You tell us this, and it's not necessary to look at it, but you tell us this in paragraph 13 of the statement.
Yes.
And your social worker asked you whether or not you could, as I understand it, take your father either back to his own house or to your house.
Yes, she asked me both. She first of all said his own house, and immediately jumped in. I says, absolutely no, not a chance at all.
That was because of the fire damage?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think also, they're going into detail, your house wasn't suitable for you.
Yes, I said that to her.
Yeah, yeah. And
but can I say, I think it's beforehand in that I did get the phone call on the Sunday from the staff nurse at the ward to advise me that my father was being moved because they had found COVID in the ward.
Right.
6 bedded day, they said one patient had tested positive, so it was precautionary because my father had breathing difficulties at best. She said, we're moving your dad out into a side room. And it was a quick, she actually left a message. I hadn't been at home. So when I came home, there was a message on my answer phone. And I'd phoned, she told me her name, which I won't say. And I phoned and asked to speak to her, and I spoke with her. Yep. And she said, just as my message, your dad's getting moved because obviously he's vulnerable due to having a breathing difficulty. The smoke inhalation having been even worse, and he was in heavy oxygen therapy.
Right. After you were asked about the possibility of moving your father back into his own home or into your home, what happened to your father thereafter? Do you know?
I believe he was moved and put in a side room. I believe, if I'm remembering right, it was Ward 13 in the same hospital. Yeah. But I was told he had been moved to a side room on his own.
Right. And you tell us at paragraph 15 that on the 27th, which I think is the same day as the contact from the social worker, you were told that your father was going to be moved to a care home.
Yes.
And you were given a reason for that?
No. Obviously, we knew there was bed crisis going on all over the place, so I says to her, so why? She didn't ask me. She says to me, your father will be moved.
Yes.
But this was on the back of me saying he couldn't go to his own house or come and stay in my house. So I felt, as I said at the time, I more or less got told, if you can't take him and he can't go to his own house and he's going to have to go somewhere, he can't stay here because of COVID. And I said to her, well, has my father got COVID then? And I wasn't answered at the time. And I said, well, he's an old gentleman and he's in a hospital, so where else is it to go? And she said, well, we are admitting people younger who need beds. So obviously my father shipped it. I wasn't told where he was going on that day. That was a Tuesday, I believe. I wasn't told where he was going, but I did say to her, try and not make it anywhere that he wouldn't be familiar with at all.
Yeah. Just, can I just be clear, Mr. Deakins? Were you told by a member of staff at the hospital that they were moving your father because of the need to free up beds within the hospital?
Not a member of staff in the hospital, it was a social worker.
The social worker?
Social worker in the hospital.
Right.
She's a social worker who was based in the hospital.
So it was the social worker who told you that?
Yes, she told me my father had been moved out of the hospital, not anyone from...
Not a member of the nursing staff?
Not anyone from Air Miles Hospital, no.
Okay. Now, prior to your father, and we'll come to your father being moved to the care home in a moment,
Yeah.
but prior to your father being moved to the care home, do you know if he was tested for COVID?
I was told he was tested on the Sunday, because that was the day they told me they would move him to a side room. I was told he had been tested, they were awaiting the results. But I was never given the results of it. And in fact, my dad was even able to tell me, I asked my father that day myself, I said, have you been tested for COVID? And he said, yes. He said, that's the second time since he came. He got tested on arrival on the Friday when he first went in. Never got the results of that test. And then was tested on the Sunday after they had discovered, when I was told, rather, that they had identified COVID in the ward that he had been in.
Right. So, regarding the move of your father into a care home, we have an understanding of why. What was your reaction to that occurring?
I was angry.
Yeah. And why was that?
I felt as if he was just being pushed out, because although I hadn't known at the time that my father had COVID, he was vulnerable as it was. He was 82 years old. He had had a fire in his house. He was vulnerable. He was blind. He was had very little independence, and he needed looking after. So, not to be harder in, he deserved to have a hospital bed the same as anyone else did. But he was, but then I've heard stories of other people just getting taken out because I know there was bed crisis, they were freeing beds. But I couldn't understand why, when my father was in such a vulnerable position, not just of being admitted to hospital unwell, but with smoke inhalation, and then having been in close proximity to someone with COVID. And I thought, well, in my mind, there's no two ways about it. My father is going to have COVID, and I actually even says to my daughter the day that they took my father away, the Friday, I says, my dad will never be back here because he'll end up with COVID and he'll never see this place again.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Sixth sense, or whatever you want to call it.
Yes, you said that to one of your family members.
To my daughter who was with me that day.
Give a name.
My daughter who was with me that day.
Yeah. All right, that's paragraph 16, just to give the reference.
Yeah.
Now,
Let's see it.
At what time did you ascertain that your father had been tested for COVID?
On the Sunday when I got the phone call from the nurse to say he was being moved.
Yes.
And she told me, I said, I take it my father's been tested. She says, oh yes, we tested all the patients yesterday. And I said, have you had any results? And she says, no. And then I asked her, I says to her, should you get the results, will that become known to my father or me? And I never got an answer.
Right. So just to be clear, your father was moved on the 29th of October. That's at paragraph 19.
Yes.
He was moved into Canderavon House Care Home.
Care.
And that's in Stonehouse. And do you know whether he was tested and the results were to hand before he was moved?
No.
You don't know?
No, not at all. And I asked my dad, because my dad, he could recollect, I asked my dad, he wasn't confused. I asked him, I said, have you been, because what happened is they said on Tuesday he was going to a home. They took him out of his bed on the Wednesday and sat him in a wheelchair all day, meant for him to be getting transported to the home on the Wednesday. Yeah. And I asked him if they'd been tested for COVID then, because I know there was a thing about are people being tested prior to discharge from from hospitals to care homes. And my dad told me quite categorically he had not been tested. He said, I've been tested twice since he came in, and it was the Friday and on the Sunday. He hadn't been tested prior to getting moved, and that was on the Wednesday when I thought he was getting moved. And then late on in the Wednesday night, I spoke to him at 11 o'clock at night, and he says, they've told me I'm just to go back to my bed, I'm not getting moved now. And I said, well, I would think not at this time. And I left him the next day, and he got moved Thursday evening about 8:30 at night, and he hadn't been tested then either.
Right. When your father was in hospital, were you able to visit him?
No. And here Myers, no.
No. You tell us something about the first floor of the care home that he was moved into and what it was called.
Yes.
Can you just tell us about that, please?
It was called Stonehouse Intensive Care for COVID.
Was that a euphemism for it, or was that what it was actually known as?
For the want of a better word, it was a word on the street.
Right. Okay.
That was what it was being called.
Uh-huh. And did you find out any information which backed that up?
What happened is my dad went in there on the Thursday evening, probably about after 9 o'clock. And I'd spoken to him that night, and he was obviously getting his surroundings. I'm saying, how are you? You okay? And he was saying, I'm here. They seem all right. They seem fine. And I says to him, do you know where you are? And he says, I know it's a home, but it could be anywhere. And I said, well, I'll talk to you tomorrow. But he was more at himself so that he wasn't as much upset. Mm-hmm. And then the next day I explained to him where he was. I said, Stonehouse, you know where you are? And he knew Stonehouse, but didn't know anything of it. But I asked him if he was allowed to mix with anyone in the home, and he said, I've just been put in the room, and I've been told to stay in the room, and if I need anything, they come to me. And I've been told I've got a buzzer, so he obviously wasn't allowed to go outside the room.
Do you know anything, or did you find out anything at that time about the prevalence of COVID within the care home?
My dad went in there, as I was saying, the Thursday night. Nobody phoned me to say that he had been received into that home. The only reason I knew that he was there was I spoke to my dad on the phone. I phoned the home the next day, and I spoke to a person, couldn't even remember their name anyway. I explained my father was brought in last night from here Myers Hospital. They said, I need to pass you through, that's upstairs. They put me to a call upstairs. And I said, I'm just wanting to see how he is. And yes, all right. And I said, I know obviously there's no visiting, but he will need stuff. Can I bring stuff? And she says, yes, you can bring stuff and leave it at the reception. I was never ever inside the doors of the home.
Okay. Were you told anything about your father's COVID test status?
Sorry, I beg your pardon, just if I can backtrack, excuse me. When I'd phoned, I also asked the person I spoke to on the phone, I said, I'm not sure if you're aware, I said, but my father has been in here hospital. You'll be aware he came from there. I said, but the reason he's been put out of there is because he had COVID in a ward. I said, so as he came to you with what would the word be? Sorry.
It's okay, don't worry. Don't worry.
No.
I was wanting to say that he came with a vulnerability.
Yeah, I was. I'm sorry.
It's all right. Don't worry. Anyway, did you question anybody in the care home as to whether or not your father had COVID?
That's it. Actually, I said to her, I've heard that COVID in your home is rife. I said, is my father any part of that? And so we're not able to discuss anything with me. I says, well, put it another way, do you have any patients within your residential home who have COVID? I can't tell you anything. I said, I'm not asking for breaching confidentiality. I said, I'm asking you for the safety of my father. I said, do you know that your place has been referred to as the COVID casualty or the COVID intensive care ward in Stonehouse? And I never got an answer off of her.
Right.
But what I was wanting to ask was were they aware that my father had been, were they told that my father had had a negative testing prior from discharge to the hospital?
Yes.
So, yeah.
And did you get an answer?
No, they
to
said
that?
they weren't aware of that. They didn't know anything.
Oh, right. Now, you mentioned about handing stuff in for your father
Yeah.
at the care home. And I think you tell us at paragraph 23 that you were able to go and you were able to see your father
Yeah.
through the window, and you were able to wave to him.
Yeah.
And was that the first time you'd seen him since he'd been admitted to Hare Myers
Yes.
after the fire?
Yes, it was.
And how long would that have been? About a week?
Yeah, well, he'd been admitted to, it was exactly a week.
Exactly a week.
He'd been admitted to the hospital. The day he got admitted to the hospital, this was the following Friday. It was late afternoon when I'd gone to the home, and the way the home sits, all the windows face to the front, and the reception part was at the back, car park. So I went to the car park and I rang a bell, and the girl came and I gave her the bag, and I said, "This is for my father," and she said, "That's fine." And when I come off, I just said, "It's all right," and she said, "I'll need to pass it upstairs. It's different staff who are upstairs." And the bell rang in my head, and thinking to myself, well, why is it different staff upstairs from what's downstairs? But the place was derelict, there was not a soul to be seen anywhere. No, I even asked my dad, I said to my dad at one point, I said, "It seems very quiet, is there any noise?" And he says, "You don't hear a thing." So anyhow, different story. So I'd come off there and went back to my car and I phoned my dad, and I says to him, "Are you looking out to the front?" And he says, "Yes." I says, "What can you see being blind?" It's the dark nights. I said, "Can you see street lights?" He says, "Yes, I can see maybe shops across the road." I says, "Go and walk over to your window and I'll come and see if I can see you." And I walked round onto the main road, where there was one up on the level, the so-called COVID intensive care unit, and he was at the window. And I was waving at him, and I put the torch on my phone to do this, so he could see where I was standing. He spoke away to me, and I was saying, "Are you all right?" And we conversed for a few moments.
Yeah. Did you form any impression about your father's appearance and how he looked?
He looked a bit, he looked tired, drawn, exhausted, pale, weak, and frail and fragile. But
you were able to talk to him over the phone?
I stabbed my phone in my hand, and he stood at the window with his phone in his hand.
How was his voice? How was his ability to talk?
Very weak, very weak.
Right. Did you get the impression that he was breathless?
Oh, very breathless, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I asked him then as well, I said to him, "You're awful out of breath." I said, "Have you been tested for COVID?" Since you went in there, and they said no. And I said, "Well, you should ask somebody if you can get a COVID test done." Because he obviously had COPD, they used inhalers as it was. So, and then the smoke inhalation only exacerbated his respiratory problems.
Yes. Yes. Okay. I understand that your father was subsequently prescribed medication.
Yes, that was further on the weekend had gone by.
Yeah. And I think there was a difficulty in obtaining that medication, which left you very frustrated.
Yeah, this is now moving on to the Friday, yes, which is the day where that became even more concerned for him, when I had phoned and asked him to get the doctor for my father, because he was. What happened is I'd gone up the night before, the Tuesday, and he appeared even worse to me. I was talking to me on the phone, he appeared weak on him, and I said, "You're not very well." When I spoke to him in the morning, he was extremely breathless and could hardly speak. I said, "You need to tell one of the members of staff that you're not feeling very well," which he did.
Right. And I think your father had a video call with a GP.
Yeah, I had asked him to get a doctor out to say what happened, but as it was a video call we'd had around about 3 o'clock that day.
And there was a prescription of medication ordered, but that I don't think, for a variety of reasons, wasn't obtained.
The doctor left a prescription at the chemist across the road for someone to go and collect it. So I'd asked my dad when a staff member was in, when a staff member was in his room. I said to my dad, because I was led to believe to begin with that a doctor had actually been there physically. But I then learned they hadn't, because I says to my dad, I said, so did they listen to your chest at the front and back? And my dad said, well, how the hell could he when he was on a camera? And I then thought, I said, so you've not seen a doctor? It was a video call. And all that kind of thing was new to my father, new to my dad. He wasn't aware of FaceTime and video calls and all that. He didn't know of it. So that was when I learned that the doctor hadn't actually been in situ. It was by a
video call.
Yeah.
Right. As I understand it, you in fact offered to go and get the prescription.
Yes.
But that was refused by the home.
By the home.
And you were by this time, this is paragraph 25, you by this time were of the view that your father was terribly, as you put it, terribly ill.
Yes, he was deteriorating.
Now, that evening, an ambulance was called for your father.
Yes, I phoned I was constantly on the phone with my dad, but I says to him, did you get the tablets yet? And I was asking him every 10, 15 minutes, he said, no, and I was to myself, well, 6 o'clock, chemist is going to be closed, they're not going to have it. So, but prior to that, when I was, it got to 6 o'clock, and I says to my dad, oh, sorry, I'm mixed up.
No, don't worry. I think we're looking at the time that, well, I'll just direct you to it. There was an ambulance called for your father.
Yeah, that was because I eventually got through to the home. The phone was ringing and ringing and ringing. And I says to my dad, when he was in the room, I says, I was on his mobile phone, I says, do me a favour, pull your buzzer in your room to get a member of staff to come into the room. And there wasn't anybody there, I says, so pull your buzzer. And then I said, when the boy came on the phone, I said, I've been phoning the phone. I've been phoning an office phone, which was ringing relentlessly, no one's answering the phone. And I was sitting in my own house, my daughter will tell you if I'm telling a lie. I had my landline phone in that hand, my mobile phone in that hand. That was on the phone with my father here, and I was phoning the home on my landline, ringing and ringing, and I said, okay, we'll pick the phone up, and a female was the first person that I spoke to. Told her who I was, told her who my father was, and I said to her, I want to know why, when you were given a prescription by a GP after 3 o'clock, and it's 6 o'clock now, and after 6 o'clock, and it's not been collected from my father, who's dreadfully unwell, and he's now not going to get an antibiotic another day, he'll not last another day. And I was told one thing and another, we never managed to get to the chemist, we're short staffed, or this, or that, or the next. And I says, well, I did say I would have came and got it.
Yeah. Paramedics arrived, and you were informed by a senior carer, again, please don't name that person. And you were put on loudspeaker to speak to the paramedics, is that right? And what did the paramedics tell you about your father's condition?
They said my father was gravely unwell, seriously unwell. He had an extremely high temperature. And I said to them, so what are you thinking of? And they said he's either got sepsis or COVID-19, or both.
And what were they going to do with your father? Were they going to take him to hospital?
Yeah, they immediately put oxygen on, and they said they've got him in the highest resolution of oxygen that they could give him, and they said they'd given him some pain relief to calm him down because his breathing was getting was becoming very distressed. Excuse me. And they'd given him something to tell me. They said to me, they said, we will be lighting your father to the hospital. And I asked where he was, and they just said to me, Whistle General.
Right. I think you made a complaint about the way in which your father had been treated at the care home.
Yes.
And the level of communication that the care home had with you.
Yes.
What was the outcome of that complaint?
No complaint. No response. I was never given a response. Yeah. But can I say, on the evening when I'd spoken to the senior carer, who inadvertently was the chap who had phoned the ambulance for my dad, he says to me he would have to log everything that happened. And I says to him, well, who is the manager? I want to talk to the manager. Do you have anyone senior to you? And he said, no, he was in charge. And I said, I'll be phoning tomorrow. And he says to me, I'll get the manager to phone you. When are you available? And I say, from 7 a.m. I will receive a phone call then from your manager says yes, I never received anything at all. I obviously got preoccupied with the fact that my father had then been taken to hospital and was very unwell.
Yes. Now, your father was taken to Wishaw General Hospital, and you tell us at paragraph 30 that he was admitted later that particular evening.
Yeah.
You say you received a call from a consultant at 10:50 p.m.
That's right, the Friday night.
And you were told, I think, that your dad's condition was critical.
Yes.
Yep. And that he'd been taken to the high dependency unit.
Yep.
Yeah. Also, I think you were told that you should contact other family members to let them know.
Yes, and she ascertained at that point as well if my dad had been in contact with any of us in the last 10 days, but I'd explained no because he'd been in hospital.
Yeah. So far as your father's COVID status was concerned, were you told on admission to Wishaw General whether they thought he had COVID?
He was tested immediately upon being taken in, but the doctor who I spoke with that night says to me she was 99.9% certain my father was what they called HSC, hospital-acquired COVID.
Yes. Just a moment. Subsequently, did you receive confirmation that your father had in fact tested positive?
Yes, the next day I got a phone call from another doctor about lunchtime, and he says to me, I'm phoning to tell you that your dad's COVID results are positive, and he asked me if I would give my permission for the results to be shared with Bereaved home, and I said yes, by all means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Were you able at this time to still contact your father by phone?
Just by phone, yes.
Yes. And what impression did you get regarding those telephone conversations as to your father's condition?
He was very ill, very ill. I tried to limit the conversation because it was a struggle for him to speak, to straining himself to speak.
Right.
He was so exhausted, he could hardly get his words out, and he was just failing and becoming more and more ill.
And just perhaps to help you, Mr. Deakins, at paragraph 33 of your statement, you say that you were told to contact family members.
Yes.
On the 9th of November. So this is about 4 days after your father was admitted.
Yes.
To Wishaw General, is that right?
Yeah.
And I take it that being told to contact family members is a precursor, regrettably, to somebody passing away.
Yeah, I got a call that morning, just about 6 a.m. on the 9th, and it was to the nurse in charge, and she says to me, I know you've not been able to come and see your father, but I think the time is now.
Right. And were you grateful for that?
Extremely.
Yes. And I think you and a number of your family members, and again, please don't name them, were able to go and see your father, as you say, in half-hour bursts.
Yes, I lived the closest to the hospital, so I was the first one there I was able to get over. But en route, I'd managed to contact my brother and my sister. Right. And I told them what was happening. We'd spoken all over the weekend, and they'd been talking to my dad on the phone as well, and they knew how ill he was becoming. But in the Monday morning when I got the call, I'd phoned them to tell them I've been told to come to the hospital. You should make your way there. And I arrived there at 7. They came something. My brother actually was in work, and he left and he got there. I would say he arrived about 8:30. And my sister was staying with my niece in Kilmarnock. The time they drove up, they got there mid-morning.
I think this was probably the 10th of November.
That would be the Tuesday.
And I think that you stayed with your father until about 8 p.m. that evening.
The Tuesday evening, yeah.
And by this time, he'd slipped into a coma.
Yeah.
And you, I think, went home. And as you say at paragraph 35, waited for a full waited for the phone call for that throughout
Yeah,
that night?
I got home and I went to his house first to do some bits and whatever, and I went home and I just basically sat and waited because I knew that his death was pretty imminent. Yeah. So I just sat waiting, and I'd phoned actually at 3 a.m. to ask how he was, and they said he's still the same, peaceful. And one nurse actually says to me, she says, "Why aren't you sleeping?" And I says, "Well, I can't sleep." And she says, "Well, you're welcome to come over if you want, but I would say to you not to." She said, "Just stay away, you know where you are, you're not far, when we need you, we'll give you a call, we won't leave you to the last minute." Okay. Which is what I did. And
in fact, they didn't leave you till the last minute. They did contact you the following day, which was the 11th of November, told you that you should go to the hospital, and you were there in time to spend some time with your father before he died.
Roughly 8 minutes.
Yes. And I think your brother, again, please don't name him, he also came to the hospital, but he got there 10 minutes after your father had died.
Yeah.
And I think also you were grateful for the way in which the staff at the hospital allowed you to spend time with your father.
Staff were excellent. The staff were above and beyond. They were fantastic. Excellent.
Yeah. Right. Your father's death certificate noted COVID-19 pneumonia as the cause of death. And you tell us at paragraph 40 that there were only 20 people allowed at the funeral.
Yeah.
And this was, I think, a difficulty because your father was well known, well liked from a big family. And as you say, it was horrible having to say to people that they could not come to the funeral.
Yeah, of course. And
one of the points you make, in that paragraph 40, and also in paragraph 47, that having to choose people who could be there and by exclusion people who couldn't be there.
That's correct.
This caused a problem within your family.
It did.
Could you just explain that, please?
Well, as I said, my dad was from quite a large family, and he was a very popular person. They made a lot of friends who were personal friends as well as people in the immediate family. So there was one aunts and uncles who had to be told that they couldn't come, and one aunt who lived in England, and she was on the phone and was all prepared and asking where she could go and stay when she came to Scotland. I said, "I'm sorry, but you can't." And why not? And I was told why not? Well, there were restrictions, for goodness sake. And then I just never talked to you again. The phone went down and never broke breath to me since then. Sure. And that was all those years ago.
And that was as a consequence of having to exclude them from the funeral?
Pardon?
That was as a consequence of having to exclude them from the funeral?
Yes.
Okay. Now, at paragraph 42 of your statement, you again draw on your experience as a manager of a mental health unit for 14 years.
Yeah.
And you tell us that the basic instinct is to care for people. But you say that, in your view, the care home did not do that.
No.
Could you just explain why you've come to that view?
There was no communication at all when my dad left Hare Myers at night to be transported to the care home and he was received there. I didn't get a phone call from anyone to say, "Your father's arrived here," at all, and I would have expected that. Because in my day of working in residential establishments, you would never have gotten away with that. It was basic protocol. You had to keep relatives informed of the care that their relative was receiving. Right. I had no communication at all. And when I'm saying about the basic instinct to care, is the next day my father became quite unwell on the Wednesday, when they had to be told that my father was unwell and told to get an ambulance to the point where I demanded. And I lost my rag at one point, and I said, "If you don't get an ambulance, I'm going to come up and I'm going to sit in the car park and I'm going to dial 999 myself, and I'll pull my father out if you don't do something." They had to be pushed and not threatened, but heavily coerced into the fact to get my father the medical attention that he needed. because I did say to him, I said, if you don't get my father to hospital, he's going to be dead within the matter of 4 hours. So do something, but they had to be told to do something. They didn't do it, so there was no basic instinct for them to care, not to think, well, the man needs help, he's unwell, even for by the fact that a doctor who came, a doctor had prescribed drugs for him that day that was never given to him. That's just wrong. That's malpractice in my view.
You, after your father's death, you did receive a letter from the Procurator Fiscal.
Yes.
Advising that they were looking into your father's death, presumably because of the connection with having been in a care home.
Yeah.
And you were told that you would be kept informed. Have you been kept informed by the fiscal?
Periodic intervals there was. I'm sure, if I remember correctly, there was like a tick box on it that would say how often do you want to be kept informed, and it was things like more or less as and when necessary, or at 3-month intervals, or maybe as something arises. But I have been kept via the solicitors as well, and the COVID-19 bereavement group. Been kept abreast of what all's going on.
Okay.
And I actually even had the member of the Procurator Fiscal to take my statement as well. I'd given the statement, if I'm remembering right, back in the beginning of December.
Right.
That was for Procurator purpose. Sorry.
It's all right. It's all right. Don't worry. Just on the question of impact, you tell us that you were very close to your father, and I think we've gathered that from what you said earlier. You say in paragraph 45 that initially you were very angry about the way he was shunted about in Hairmyres, and then, as you put it, bumped into a care home, and a lack of communication, and that you had absolutely no say in what happened to your father.
No, none whatsoever.
And I think you wrote to the care home manager, as you put it, venting your anger.
Very much so.
Yeah. Have you had a response to that?
Never.
Okay.
Never even got an acknowledgement.
Right. And I think you conclude at paragraph 48 by saying you were very angry with the lack of communication. And again, is that directed principally at at Hairmyres and at the care home?
Both. The whole transitional period from the day when my dad took ill, which was the day of the fire, all the way through until I was contacted, and probably by Wishaw General. Wishaw General, when I went in there on the Wednesday night, they did keep in contact with me, and plus the fact whenever I was talking to my dad on the phone, that I would say to him, if the nurse knew, you asked the nurse if she can speak for a minute to save you phone, and they were very nice, very hospitable, and they took their time with him. So the communication was there. I knew what was happening from when my dad went in. I knew how good he was doing, how bad he was doing, or how indifferent. But just there was no transition or anything from going from Hairmyres into the home, from the home contacting me, who they knew was next of kin, and I mean they didn't even phone to say he needs anything, or he's here, he's there, or anything at all. Nothing, just there was zilch. Which is why I feel he was treated unfairly, because my dad, although my dad had his faculties, he could have been an older person who maybe wasn't able to ask and articulate the language and speak and answer things for themselves.
You set out very briefly but very pointedly some lessons to be learned in your view. The first is be prepared. They could have been more prepared. Who is the they? Governing bodies, World Health Organization, all the people with their statistics, things like PPE, for example. There was the big stramash with that as well. They kind of, like, in my mind, like not with given the fact of my father, but being a Joe Blogs, if you like, saw what was coming. So we all knew we were all heading the one way. We all knew we were going to end up locked down. We knew there was things of shortages of PPE and things like that. And then there's this whole ongoing thing of
preparedness. There was no preparedness. It's come up a lot in these COVID inquiries that I have followed in England and in Scotland as well. So a lot of things is there laid bare, and then there's obviously the speculation of we should have locked down in January. When it started in January early, when the first case came in, it should have been ongoing from there, but people sat back to not bother, and they let big events happen, like rugby events and all the rest of it. Maybe things should have happened, those shouldn't have happened, but who's to say? It happened, and it happened and it's done.
The second lesson you say is act on advice. Again, with your former nursing profession hat on, what sort of advice are you envisaging?
Well, maybe when the health officials were telling the government to take the advice and to lock down at a particular time and to do whatever and to close schools and to get people to work from home and do this and do that, they were slow to react with some things. So that was my slant on it, not from a point of view of having been a previous healthcare worker or anything, but from the point of view of myself and having a family and having to protect an older relative through lockdowns and all the rest. I mean, and to go from being in my father's house every day to go for weeks on end of chats, phoning and saying, right, Dad, I'm outside, I've dropped your bags of shopping at the door. I'm sorry, I can't come in your kitchen and put them in, you'll have to come up and go and get it yourself, which half killed them. But he had to do that, as we all did.
Mr. Deakins, that's really all I've got to ask you under reference to your statement. I know it's been a bit of an ordeal for you, but thank you very much for the evidence you've given to us. Is there anything else that you'd like to tell us?
No, I think I've put out our chats, and I think of all we need to know. No.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Deakins, for your help.
Thank you very much, Nate.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Deakins.
Thank you.
Thank you for giving your evidence, and you're obviously free to go now. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, my lord. The next witness is Melanie Hunter, but if we could have a few minutes to
of course.
Put people in place.
It's just on before past, so shall we say about between 20 and 1:45?
That'll be fine, my lord. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, good afternoon, Mr. Gale.
My Lord, good afternoon again. The next witness, and indeed the final witness today, is Melanie Hunter. She's present in the room with us now.
Good afternoon, Miss Hunter.
Good afternoon.
Now, Mr. Gale, when you're
Thank you, my Lord. Mrs. Hunter, your full name is Melanie Hunter,
Yes.
and your personal details and contact details are known to the inquiry.
Yes.
And you, like all of the witnesses, have provided the inquiry with a statement. The reference for that statement is SCIWT 0618, and then 502 this time. You're here to tell us about the circumstances of the death of your father, John Cowan.
Yes.
And there is a restriction order, and while you can mention, obviously, your father's name and your mother's name, and we'll come to that in a moment, and also Ayr Hospital, where your father died, but can you avoid mentioning the names of certain carers, and also, I think, the name of your daughter?
Okay.
If you can just call her your daughter.
My daughter. Yeah.
That'll be fine.
Thank you.
Now, we know that your father sadly died on the 8th of November 2020.
He did.
And from paragraph 24 of your statement, we know that he was 83 when he died.
He just turned 83, yes.
And he died in Ayr Hospital.
He did.
He had tested positive for COVID. What was the cause of death on his death certificate? Do you
COVID
remember?
and pneumonia.
COVID and pneumonia. Yeah. Now, inherent in all this is the relationship between your father and mother. And it was, I think, because of your father's wish to be with your mother in a care home,
Yes.
that he went to live with her there.
He did.
Now, just so that everyone is aware, you've subsequently lost your mother. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. I don't want to, and I appreciate it's very upsetting for you, but I think we need just to establish that
Yes.
that has regrettably happened. Now, your father and mother, I think, had been, up until your father's death, had been married for some 60 years.
They had, yes.
Yeah. And between June 2002 and August 2020, they lived in a flat in Ayr.
They did.
And I think they were very happy there.
Loved it.
Yeah. And your mother had a number of health issues.
She did.
And latterly, those included COPD.
Yes.
Were there any other issues she had?
She had enlarged liver, dementia,
Yes.
early stages heart failure, diabetic, insulin dependent.
Right.
She was very overweight when she went into the nursing home. Yeah, her health wasn't great.
Right. Well, we'll come to the circumstances of going into a nursing home in a moment. Prior to the onset of the pandemic in early 2020, you, I think, together with an employed carer, looked after your parents.
I did.
And did your father have any substantial health issues?
He was fit and healthy. He had been diagnosed with onset of dementia, very, very early dementia. You talking to him, you wouldn't have known. He did take anticoagulant medication, but it was very well controlled. I took him to the hospital every month. That was checked. It was very well controlled, and apart from that, he was fit and healthy. Had worked 7 days a week all his life, self-employed, and was just a wonderful man.
I don't want to put a time limit on it, but in perhaps the 2 or 3 years prior to the onset of the pandemic, how did your parents get on with day-to-day life? Were they able to do things? Were they able to go places?
Absolutely. Initially, really, they didn't need me every day. I probably took over a wee bit just to look after them because I loved them. They were very independent, as that generation most definitely are. They loved life. They went day trips. I sent them on a coach trip, their 2 selves. They went away up north to Inverness. We took them on holiday. I had them in Corfu. We went abroad. We went to Spain. They enjoyed their retirement. They had worked hard for it. And they were absolutely loving life, really. Mum's health wasn't great, but it didn't stop her doing anything.
Right. Okay. I think you were concerned, particularly given your mother's COPD.
Yes.
You were concerned when everybody became aware of the news coming out of China, and particularly what was happening in Italy and Spain.
Yes.
About the dangers of the coronavirus.
Yes.
And I think, in fact, your daughter, and again, please don't name her, but your daughter caught COVID.
She did.
And so you at a very early stage,
yes,
you saw the effects of somebody catching COVID.
She was very, very poorly. Yes. They had gave her, she was in a hospital, she had 7 nebulizers, and they said if she needed 1 more, she'd be going to intensive care.
Right. Just as a matter of interest, and again, I don't want to pry, did your daughter have any pre-existing health issues?
No.
No. So this was a relatively young person with no pre-existing health issues, but who was very ill as a consequence of COVID.
Yes, she was an elite athlete, so she was very fit.
Okay, right. You took a decision, I think, as you put it, that you would lock your parents down.
I did, a week before the official lockdown.
Yeah. So what was your thinking about that?
I was very worried about my mum. And if Mum catches this, it's going to be really serious. You had seen what was happening in Italy, etc. And I just made that decision. I just took that call for the sake of my mum and dad. Yeah. They didn't complain. They took it, and they were amazing with it.
Yes. With your parents' health issues, were they in the shielding category?
Yes, they
were. So with them in the shielding category, and you having taken the decision that you would effectively lock them down,
yes.
What were the arrangements for getting them food and meals, and were they able to do that, or did you assist with that?
Well, I had obviously done all their shopping before. I got meals, I paid for meals to get delivered to their house the whole of lockdown, every day. They got a cooked meal from hotels that were delivering, restaurants that were delivering. I knew it was healthy, it was good food, and I knew they would eat it. The carer was going in the morning, making sure they had their cereal in their toast, whatever porridge in the morning, and she would make a sandwich for them for lunchtime. I would take their bread and their milk down. They would stay in one room. I would go in, put their shopping away, leave with full PPE on. Couldn't, just kept them at a distance from everybody.
Okay. After the first period of lockdown had ended, you were able, I think, to go out for lunch with your parents.
Yes.
And I think this would have been perhaps the first time that they'd been out for some considerable time.
Over 14 weeks.
Right. And when you took them out, you observe in paragraph 12 of your statement the effect that the lockdown had on them. Can you explain what it was?
It wasn't until I actually got them outside that I realised, just by looking at them, they did no garden to go in. They had sat in a top floor flat. They had no natural vitamin D. They had no exercise. They were very tired. It had a real effect. I've seen my dad had aged quite a bit just in that short period of time.
Was the effect more on your mother or more on your father, or was it different effects on both of them?
More on my mother, because my mum was sleeping all the time. Right. Trying to get her out of bed was so difficult. She ended up in hospital with her diabetes as well.
Right. And I think decision was taken in July 2020 by your mother's consultant that she needed 24-hour nursing care.
Yes, that was the first time it had ever been brought up.
Yeah. And what was you mentioned earlier that your mother had dementia. What was the level of her dementia at that time? Can you remember?
Oh, she, you could sit and chat. You wouldn't have known. It was very early stages. Very
early stage. And I think you also had a power of attorney in respect of both your parents.
I did.
So what was your father's reaction to being told by your mother's consultant that she needed 24-hour care?
Not great initially. He took it in the chin when he was with the consultant, but when we got home he phoned his lawyer to see if he could stop it from happening. Lucky enough, the lawyer knew us all as a family and spoke to me. I explained what happened. He agreed that Mum really did now need 24-hour nursing care, and explained that to my dad. So between the consultant, myself and the lawyer, he accepted that was the right choice to make, yes.
Very good. You chose a care home for a nursing home for your mother. And we'll come to that in a moment. It was called Windy Hill.
Windy Hall.
Windy Hall, I'm sorry. Windy Hall. At that stage, and looking at it from your perspective, how did you feel about your mother having to go into a nursing home?
I thought they would be safe. I thought it would just be like they were at home. They would be locked away. There'd be a nurse there to look after Mum. Dad worried a lot about Mum. When I left, he would phone the house at least 2 or 3 times. So when I wasn't there, he was always worried something would happen to Mum. So I knew this would be a good thing for Dad, because Dad said, if your mum's going into a nursing home, then I'm going with her. Although he didn't have to.
Right.
he chose to go in with her.
Your mother went into the nursing home from hospital.
Yes, she
Is
did.
that right? And that was on the 25th of August 2020.
Yes.
I think your daughter was also involved in that. Is that right?
Yep, my daughter had went and got her papa and had taken him for pancakes for his breakfast before we met at Windy Hall. We arranged to be there. I picked my mum up at the hospital and brought her down, and we met there at 11 o'clock that morning, and the two of them went in together.
Right. So the arrangement was that both your mum and dad would go into the care home, albeit that it was really only your mum who needed
Yes.
to be there. Is that right?
Yes.
And they went in together on the 25th of August 2020.
They did.
I think they had to isolate, or self-isolate, upon admission.
Yes, I had to take my dad to get a COVID test before he went in. Mum obviously had to get a COVID test, but they had to self-isolate in their room for 2 weeks.
Right. Now, your father, according to your statement, seemed to, as you put it, embrace the place.
He certainly did.
Yeah. And I think you did a lot to personalise the room in which they were, a lot of their own furniture and so on.
Yeah. Apart from the fitted wardrobes, everything had been brought from their flat. They had a huge big room. Yeah.
Right. And they had a double room, as it were.
Yep, they had their own double bed, yep, and furniture, etc. Yes.
Yep. Now, during that 2-week period of isolation, how were you able to communicate with your parents?
It was mainly through a window, but they actually had a patio door at the back of the building from their room. So they would allow me to go round the back of the building. They would open the patio door and I would stand about 10 metres away with a mask on, just to help them settle in, because it was obviously they were stuck in that room with no other visitors. But that was once or twice. After that, it was through a window.
And I think you used to take your dog for a walk past,
Yes.
so that you could wave to them, essentially.
Yes, I did.
Yeah. And I think, obviously, indicative of your relationship with and affection for your parents, you say that this process broke your heart at paragraph 18, but you kept telling yourself it was to keep them safe.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Your father, I think, had some concerns about being in the care home and the financing of it.
Yes, my dad had always taken control of his own finances, and not been able to go to the bank every day to check his balance was, that's true, kind of played on his mind. I kept reassuring him that their bills were getting paid, which they were, and they were absolutely fine, but he was always a man that was in control, that liked to be in control. He always took control of the finances, and not been able to see how, because I used to get him with printouts of his balance and take it down to him. Yeah.
Right. You were able to keep in touch with them through, as well as walking by with your dog and able to have window visits, you were able to keep in touch with them through use of a mobile phone. I think you're very appreciative of the staff in the care home
Yes,
for
it was,
making that available to you.
yeah, it was through an iPad, but I used to always just get the top of his head because he would never know exactly where to hold it. But yes, that made a huge difference rather than just a phone call, yes.
Now, can I take you to your father's birthday in October 2020? And I think we know that was his 83rd birthday. And at that time, the home was in strict lockdown, I think.
Yes, it was.
And you had a video call with your parents on that date. What did you notice during that call?
Dad was never one for lying in bed. He was always up first thing in the morning. The staff had told me that he had been in bed all day. They had Dad handed in a birthday cake for him. They had brought the cake through. He wasn't really interested, and he loved getting fussed over on his birthday. He was just lying in his bed, just looked very tired.
Right. And as a consequence of that, or possibly just as a routine, I think your parents were then tested for COVID.
They were.
And one was positive, one was negative. Who was positive?
My mum.
Your mum. And was there talk of splitting them up and putting one in a different room?
Yes, there was. The nursing home asked me if they wanted me to move Dad out into another room. I chose to keep them together.
Okay. And subsequently, your father also tested positive?
The following day, yes.
And a decision was taken then that, by the home, that an ambulance was to be called, and one of your parents was to be taken to Ayr Hospital.
Yes.
Who was that, and what was the reason for that?
That was my dad. They said because he had a slight temperature, the GP obviously had refused to come out, and they said just phone an ambulance and he was to go up to hospital.
Okay. And I think you were told by your daughter, whose friend was the ambulance technician.
Correct.
During that transfer.
Yes.
That she was somewhat surprised because she knew your father about why he was being transferred.
Very shocked. Yes, he was laughing and joking with her and went, "Oh, you're my granddaughter's wee friend," and he recognised her right away and was laughing and joking in the ambulance with her. She did think it was a bit odd.
The views, I think, that were taken as to why your father was being admitted to hospital was that it was precautionary.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, were you told that? Again, don't give the name of anybody, but were you told that was? Yes,
there was no real huge risk, and he was just going up there just to be kept an eye on.
Yeah. What was happening to your mother?
Mum was left in the nursing home.
Right. Now, things advanced, I'm afraid, and I'm sure you're afraid, very quickly.
Yes.
And 3 or 4 days later, you were told that your father was very unwell.
Yes.
And you also learned about a do not resuscitate notice in relation to your father. You described that at paragraphs 29 to 32. What was your reaction to learning that?
Extremely angry. Found out through a staff nurse that when they said that Dad had taken quite ill, I had asked, will he go to intensive care? And they said no, do not resuscitate had been signed.
And had that been discussed with you?
No,
You had a power of attorney,
I did.
and it was not discussed with you.
No.
Do you know, and I think you go on to talk about it later, but do you know how it came about that decision was taken?
My personal view was that they just seen a man, 83, the dress came from a nursing home, and he was disposable.
Yes, okay. Do you know who took the decision?
The consultant.
Okay. And did you subsequently discuss that with him?
No, he wouldn't
Or
phone
him
me.
or her?
It was a gentleman. No, he wouldn't phone me. He got his senior house officer to phone me.
And what were you told about it?
I was told that if he went to intensive care, he wouldn't survive.
Right. What was your view about that?
How would you know that without trying?
Okay. Yeah. And did you formally object to the fact that...
Yes, I did, but I was basically told it'll get me nowhere. It was signed, it was in his notes, and that was it.
And it had been signed by the consultant?
Yes.
Do you know if it was communicated to your father?
No.
It wasn't, or you don't know?
I don't know, but I very much doubt it.
Okay.
My dad wouldn't have understood, not that he wouldn't have understood. The first thing he would have said was, you need to speak to my daughter, because that's what my dad done.
And I think you summarise this at paragraph 33 and also paragraph 50 of your statement. And I think there's a slight typo there. I think what you're saying is that the view was taken that your father should be regarded as being dispensable rather than indispensable.
Sorry, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think we all realise that, but just for correctness. Can you, I appreciate it may be difficult, but if you can just briefly describe the next couple of days, and perhaps I can assist you. Taking it short, your father developed symptoms of delirium.
He did.
Yeah. And he was taking his mask off, I think.
He was starting to diffuse food.
Yes.
And he was pulling at his oxygen mask. He was kind of thrashing about in the bed, they told me. I got the impression he was just becoming a bit of hard work for them.
Right. Yes, you say that in paragraph 34, and you also say that if you had been allowed in, you're sure that the outcome would have been a lot different.
I've got absolutely no doubt about it.
Explain that, please.
My dad was very much a family man, huge family man. If I had been allowed in and had been able to chat to him and explain to him, he would have listened and done it. I was a daddy's girl, and he would have done anything for me.
Okay. Now we're concentrating obviously on your father in hospital. What was the position about your mother?
My mum had been admitted into the ward the day after my dad,
Right.
so I had both of them in with COVID at the same time.
Both in the same hospital?
Yes.
And how was your mum?
Mum was quite stable. They didn't seem overly concerned about mum.
Right. Now, subsequently, I think a consultant contacted you and asked you to come to the hospital.
Yes, he did, 10 o'clock in the morning on the Sunday morning.
Yeah, and I think we don't need to be a genius to understand the circumstances of that. You were shown to your father's room.
Yes.
And again, I'll take you to it. Your father was very thin. He was showing, he was in a state of delirium. Your mother was allowed in to see him, I think, is that right?
Yes. they asked if they wanted my mum to be brought through to see him, so they brought her through in a wheelchair. Thought it was her husband of 60 years. She'd absolutely be allowed to see her husband. So they brought my mum through for a short time to see my dad, yes.
So your mother was allowed in. No easy way of putting it. Obviously your father was dying.
Yes, he was.
Was your mother aware of that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, she was.
Yes. Your daughter, and again, please don't name her, but your daughter also came in. What was your daughter's job?
She's a nurse.
She was a nurse. Okay, because I think at some point she does give an opinion on taking her granddaughter's hat off and putting a nursing hat on.
Yes.
We'll come to that in a moment. But I think her presence in your father's room caused a problem.
It did. My sister had left. She was visibly very upset, and it was just me and my dad. This had got back to my daughter and my husband, and my daughter had said that she was coming up, so she came to the ward. They told her that she couldn't get in, and she said that my mum is not going through this on her own, and I'm coming in. And the nurse agreed, and his exact words were, I totally agree with you, I would do the same. So she was brought in, she came down to the room. I was surprised but so relieved to see her. And then a different male nurse came into the room and walked in and rudely said, "You need to leave." And we were like, "What do you mean?" She went, "You need to get out of here. You're not supposed to be here." And she went, "I'm not leaving my mum." And he goes, "I'm going to phone security." Well, my dad was lying down in his bed. And we just went, "Go and phone them." But they never appeared.
No. Discretion was the better part of valour, perhaps.
Sorry?
Discretion was the better part of valour in that situation. Okay. You also mentioned that a nursing assistant who had been off for some days and had seen your father upon his admission to hospital, then saw your father in the very latter stages of his life.
She did. She was night shift, yes.
You talk about that at paragraph 42 and also on paragraph 50. She couldn't believe, as I understand it, the deterioration in that period of time.
Very shocked. I've never seen a nurse's assistant looking so shocked. She'd said that before she'd went off, she had been laughing and joking with my dad. My dad always had funny wee sayings, and he would say, "Right, come into my office." So, so when they came into his room to see him, and this is what we had been talking about. She'd said to him, "Right, come into my office." And she was just standing in total disbelief, and she couldn't believe what she was seeing.
Right. Now, against that background, you say at paragraph 42, and also say something similar at paragraph 50, of your statement, that you got the feeling that something wasn't right and that something didn't add up.
Yes.
Can you explain that, please?
From the nursing assistant's view, and there was, I suppose you could just say it was a gut feeling. The looks I was also getting from a couple other members of staff, they couldn't look me in the eye, and it was a bit kind of standoffish. Something wasn't sitting well with me. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was just something not right.
Now, I normally don't ask people, when I'm asking questions, for people to indulge in speculation.
Yes.
But I'm going to ask you.
Okay.
What do you think wasn't right?
I I don't think they gave him what they said they had gave him.
In terms of what?
They said that as soon as he had came to the hospital, he'd been put on the steroids.
Right. Okay. Now, sadly, your father died at 11 p.m. on the 8th of November. Can you tell us what your daughter, and I asked you about your daughter's profession. Your daughter said something about her grandfather's death from the perspective of her position as a nurse. What was that?
Her exact words were, putting her nursing hat on, that was a horrific death.
Was your mother able to see your father before he died?
Yes.
And your mother, I think, remained in hospital for about a month.
She did.
And so after that, did she go back to the care home?
She did.
Yes. And I think you tell us that 4 weeks later she was able to have the first vaccine. Her first vaccine.
Yes, she did.
Yeah. And I think you make the point that your father was that close.
So close.
Yeah. Moment. Yes, just a point you've made at paragraph 47 of your statement. You say that you found out that the government was offering care nursing homes cash incentives to accept patients without a COVID test being carried out. And you heard that they were offering £1,500
Yes.
to receive patients from hospitals.
Yes.
Again, without naming anyone. Can you tell us where you got that information from?
The carer that looked after them at home.
Okay. And do you know where she got that information from?
That I can't answer.
You don't know. Okay. Now, you do talk about your own feelings of guilt, and I don't think anybody's heard what you've gone through and what you've done would say that you have any reason to feel that, but you obviously felt it.
I did.
And can you explain why you did feel it?
I had kept them safe right through the first lockdown in their flat. Can I have a minute?
Yes,
please?
certainly. Take your time. You okay to carry on? Okay, we're nearly finished.
It's okay.
Right. I don't want to.
Sorry.
I don't want to exacerbate what you've just gone through, but one expression that you use at paragraph 49 rather struck me, that you were, you, I suppose, chastise yourself for not shouting louder than you did.
Yes, I wish I had.
Yeah.
I wish I had questioned more. I wish I hadn't just accepted doctors' decisions, but not actually been able to see them in person whilst they were in hospital. Had a massive impact on myself, and I very much believe on them also.
Now, your account of your bereavement and your father's funeral is similar to many others that we've heard, and I don't want to take you through going through that, but again, the numbers at the funeral were limited. And your father was well known. And I think there was, as you've said, there were over 800 people left their condolences.
Yes.
But there were only 19 people who could be at his funeral.
Last
There should have been 20, but your mother wasn't able to be there.
Yes.
Yeah, just a couple of other things, Mrs. Hunter. Paragraph 58 of your statement, you expressed the view that the staff in the care home were, as you put it, hung out to dry.
Yes, I think they were.
Can you explain that, please?
Once the care home opened back up, obviously I hadn't really got to know the staff when they initially moved in, and when it opened back up and you get chatting to them and you're finding out everything they went through, they'd been told that they weren't to spend any time in rooms with people that were dying, that were in, out. So they were just to be basically left to die on their own. They weren't allowed to sit with them.
I think you describe it as it was a get-in, get-out approach from the government.
Yes, that's what they had been told, yes.
Yeah. And I think you indicate that, to your knowledge, many staff after COVID chose other career paths.
They did.
I think you subsequently found or obtained some information as to how COVID got into the care.
I do, yes.
And how was that?
It had came from a husband and wife carers who had children at school, and the schools were still on.
All right, we'll just leave it. Okay. Yes. You also, I think, questioned who it was to transfer your mother and father into hospital.
I wasn't told who it was. I just assumed the nursing home, but I did find out later that the GP was just sent to the hospital. That was it.
Okay. Now, you make a fairly limited and perhaps sweeping statement at paragraph 1. Say that you feel died incompetence and negligence.
Yes.
Again, is there any individual, naming anybody who you feel into having been incompetent and negligent?
I love the NHS, but sadly I think they were let down by me and the staff at the hospital who were working under circumstances. I truly believe they had saw my dad's address, a man of 83, in a care home, and that was it. He was.
Now, you did write to the then minister.
I did.
To your dad died. What did you say to her?
Close the borders.
Right. And that would have been in 2020.
Yes.
And you got a reply from a member of her staff, I think.
Yes.
And you put it, a standard reply saying sorry for your loss.
Yes.
But it wasn't anything more than that.
That's it.
Okay. Right. Now, Mrs. Hunter, is there anything else that you'd like to tell us, having provided your statement and having given evidence today?
My dad was a wonderful man, totally committed to his family all his life. I know we're going to lose our parents. I've just recently lost my mum. That's part of life. But we should never lose a parent under these circumstances like that. I should never have been told I couldn't go and visit my dad in hospital. I should have been able to be there by his side. And I have got absolutely no doubt if I had been by his side, he would have pulled through. He loved his family. He would have done anything for us. He deserved better. He had worked hard all his life. He had served his national service and has been so let down, as we all have been. And sadly, I don't think things have got much better since, especially with my mum's recent passing. Things have to change. We're going to be talking, our kids are going to learn about this in 50 years' time in history. They're going to be talking about the pandemic of 2020. We've also got to be able to teach them how it never happened again, and this could happen again. We've got to be prepared. Our children learn about the wars and everything. This was a major disaster in this country. But we've also got to be able to explain to the children what changes were made to make sure this didn't happen again. But when you listen to everything that's going on now, nobody's learned anything. It's just all spin and waffle. Nobody's learned anything. And that's why this inquiry is so important. They have got to listen to us, because we're the ones that have suffered the most. And I will never get over my dad's death, never. And losing him like that, I should never.
I think you've made that very clear.
He fought for so long in that bed. He fought for 12 hours. He thrashed about. I begged them to give him something and they wouldn't.
Well, Mrs. Hunter, using your own words, what you've told us, I don't think in any way could be described as spin and waffle. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, my lord.
Yeah. Thank you as well, Mrs. Hunter. I'm very grateful for you attending today and giving your evidence. That brings the proceedings for today to an end, and we will commence again tomorrow morning at 9:45.
Yes.
Thank you all.